Two words devastated the king. Harry's low blow destroyed Charles. For years there was hope the spoiler son could patch things up with the king, but then he uttered a phrase that changed everything. We are a comparatively short 3.5 years into the mess that has resulted in a British duke and his wife flouncing off to the US to share their feelings like a couple of leaky emotional taps. But tragically, there is no end in sight yet. In fact, without any of us realizing it, things took a turn for the worse earlier this year, thanks to only a couple of words that came out of Prince Harry's mouth. We have no idea what the next PR stunt is going to be, but it's going to be something absurd, we know that. Meghan Markle is spiraling out of control. The only PR pattern that we can see is the constantly revolving door of PR advisors and lawyers, each one grabbing just a little bit less money on the way out than the one before, as Meghan and Harry's bank account numbers continue to dwindle. Now that is very relevant. I can imagine that the inside of Meghan's head is split into two halves. One is scheming and manipulative and controlling, and the other one is a complete mess, basically like a fireworks factory exploding. And the result is very scary to behold, so it doesn't matter how much PR they try to put out, it's not going to make the same people stick with her. And that's relevant, because no PR campaign in the world can possibly stop this train wreck from continuing. Harry may be able to find a way out of the wreckage alive, but Meghan is only ever again going to be relevant to people like Nurse Ratched. The scam of the century is going to have ended, but not before, as a final attempt, Meghan tries something so crazy that the ending is going to be absolutely catastrophic. One thing is sure, though, Meghan will never gracefully fade away. I wish she would, but we know her too well to expect that. Let's go back to January, though, when Harry released his magnum opus of childhood anguish and resentment. While the world was reading about how Harry lost his virginity behind a pub and about how horrible it was that he and Meghan had to buy their own sofa, it turns out a couple of words managed to leave the king feeling devastated. Now, Camilla Tominey, who works for The Telegraph, broke the news a long time ago, actually, that Harry was dating some Suits actress, and not many people, other than fans of the show, had ever heard of her. And now she has come back this week to paint a far from pretty picture about how things stand between His Majesty and Meghan and Harry. So basically, there's a whole lot of pain and a whole lot of hopelessness, just like anybody stuck in that ridiculous Taylor queue yesterday. Tominey wrote, while one former aide makes the point that like any father, he loves his son very much, it is no secret that behind palace gates, the king was devastated by Harry describing Queen Camilla as his wicked stepmother, and as dangerous and a villain who left bodies in the street. See, there's something important to remember about the king. Even though he might be one of modern history's most famous cheaters, he only ever stepped out with one single woman. A woman he has spent decades moving heaven and earth for so that she can assume her rightful place by his side. For more than 30 years now, Charles has been devoted to Camilla. Now, she's a woman who knows her way around a pack of Benson and Hedges and a decent bottle of wine. But Charles loves her so much that he has gone against his mother's wishes, his family's wishes, and even the wishes of his homeland at various points in time. And if you really think about it, it's a little bit romantic. Now, maybe it doesn't seem like it, but they have quite the love story. Which is why, when His Majesty read those two words from Harry, wicked stepmother, it seems that Harry really crossed a line, and he probably destroyed any chances of making up with his father anytime soon. Now, recently, one of Her Majesty's long-standing friends told the Daily Beast Tom Sykes, talking about Harry's Camilla comments in Spare, I think Harry knew exactly what he was doing, and the result is predictable. Charles loves Camilla. He made her queen. He doesn't react very well to criticism of her. Now, a friend of the king and queen told Sykes there might have been a chance of reconciliation had it not been for the book. But Charles was dismayed and deeply hurt by what Harry said about him and about Camilla in his book. To anyone out there who is still holding on to hope that maybe father and son were going to reunite, well, it's probably time to forget those hopes. Royal relations remain at an all-time low, according to Tominey. She also says, while the Sussexes may be impatient for an apology, their royal relatives appear in no hurry whatsoever to bury the hatchet. Now, interestingly enough, there's a royal source who spoke out saying that, quote, the Netflix documentary was viewed as largely anodyne and nothing much to worry about. But when Spare came out, it, quote, took everything right back to square one. Well, nobody tell Netflix that. I mean, they spent a lot of money on what was viewed with the same nonchalance by their majesties as when they find out they've inherited yet another Scottish estate. Harry and Meghan and Netflix probably thought they were going to ruffle some feathers, but apparently not so much. And even if the king were to overlook the slight that Harry had done to his wife's reputation by casting her as an evil queen, there is another key factor here preventing the king or anybody with an HRH from picking up the phone and dialing Harry's number. And of course, that's that anything they say could end up as fodder for a future book. According to an insider who spoke with the Telegraph, there's not a lot of trust left to allow the family to maintain a good and open relationship. How do you speak openly without it ending up in Volume 2? Meghan and Harry have almost been reduced to having to host their next royal broadside on Instagram Live, and their stockpile of stories of palace woe have surely been exhausted. So it looks like maybe they don't pose such a threat to the stability of the monarchy anymore. By the sounds of things, Buckingham Palace has basically decided to move on. One insider told Tomini, in the run-up to the Queen's death and the coronation, there had to be an institutional response. But with no major royal events on the horizon, the Sussexes are no longer the subject of strategy meetings. It's like a form of grief. There is anger at what happened, but sadness at what could have been. But there is still a little bit of hope that perhaps one day things are going to get better. Maybe someday father and son will just be able to hug it out. Inside Charles and Camilla's private residence, even now, there are reportedly still photos of the whole Sussex family in prime position. So perhaps, to steal a line from Alexander Pope, Charles still hopes humbly then. I already told you, the king is a man with a pretty big heart. And you, what do you think about Harry's betrayal? Please tell me your opinion below in the comments. Remember to like and share my video with your friends and family members who need it anytime you want. And don't be afraid to click the subscribe button to get more updates in the future. Thank you so much for tuning in, have a lovely weekend, and we'll be back to see you all tomorrow.